Hey everybody, welcome to C3 Films. Today we are doing another episode of It Wasn't That Good on the 2020 version of Rebecca, which is a remake of Hitchcock's Rebecca in 1940. So we're gonna go into some spoilers. If you haven't seen either of them yet, I suggest you watch them first, then come back and watch the show. My name is Cheryl. This is
Chris.
and let's get into why we didn't think this movie was that good.
Yeah, well, first I'll say this. I'll talk about what I liked. I'll talk about what I liked before I start talking about what I didn't like. And one of the things I liked, I mentioned this briefly on our last segment, where I liked their relationship and seeing it develop. It felt believable to me, and the amount of time that passed made it feel the opening of the movie, the first 25 minutes, made it feel like it had been weeks that they had been like together. While in the original Hitchcock film, I remember thinking to myself that it felt like it had only been like a couple of days, and that felt weird to me. So this movie, it uses a montage to help it, but it it creates a more believable scenario for me to buy these two people falling in love over the course of a summer. And even when they're talking about the marriage, whereas before um, he brings up the idea of marrying her when she's about to leave. I think in the original too, but this one, the way it was handled in this movie, it kind of felt almost kind of like a knee jerk reaction of, oh my gosh, you're going to be gone. Like I have to get like marrying you. It's like almost like being sent back to another country, right? And marrying you is the only way to keep you here. It almost felt like that. Um, and so that felt like all of that felt good to me in general. But I'm not. How did you feel about how this beginning of the movie was handled in retrospect to like the last one?
I would agree. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the way it opened, the whole beginning and development of the relationship, and also with the fact that like he didn't just say, "Well, let's get married." He actually like thought about it for a while, like,
Yes.
"What do we do?" And then like, I think this is the only way. Let's do it. But also just like, initially I was disappointed because I was like, are they really just gonna remake this movie exactly the same way as the original one and like barely change anything at all? They didn't even change the time period. They just made it in color basically. But I did find that the dialogue is a little smoother and the characters acted a little bit more natural to at least us in this day and age. So
Right.
there's except for Mrs. Hopper, because she was just flat out mean and nasty, and I don't know why she would ever want to work with him.
Yeah. She like Mrs. Hopper was like we talked about this briefly, but she was a monster, and in the original, her the way she was handled felt more like a believable human being. That's kind of just aloof. She says things, but she's not trying to be mean. It just comes off that way. But in her mind, she's doing you a favor. But in this one, she like straight up looked down on her and wanted her to know that she looked down on her, and that just it I don't know why, but that didn't feel good to me. So like you talk about not remaking the same movie, so they made a change clearly for that character, but for me it didn't really feel like a good or necessary change. It basically kind of felt like trying to just make an archetype for an evil person more so than making a believable human being.
Yeah, I did find they focus a lot more on classism in the 2020 version, which I don't think was really necessary because I don't think it really played a huge role in the original film. I think it was just there because that's how things were. Like
Right.
that was just kind of thing of the time. But here they made it like an obstacle for the two of them to be together. And while it kind of was, I think it played a bigger part and a bigger focus at the beginning of the movie than it really needed.
Yeah. Do you think that this movie could have been made in modern day though? Because I was wondering when I saw that the movie was taking place in the same time period, my first thought was like, okay, with the mansion and the way the women are treated and the expectations, I told myself that this movie kind of has to take place as a period piece. But do you feel like, do you feel otherwise? Do you feel that that you can tell the same kind of story and have it be more modernized?
I think you can. I can't see why not.
Okay,
There's
yeah,
always a way that you can get around and make it your own. And I think that's one of my biggest complaints about this movie is they didn't really make it their own. They basically copied the 1940 version almost exactly, but they stripped away all of the artful, thoughtful elements of it. And
yeah.
you're basically just left with a bare story with bare actions, and so you're just kind of left with an unremarkable film.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to do a couple of. Well, it's funny because you saw about remaking the same movie. They actually had like some of the same lines, like verbatim, because I had watched the movies like basic, not back to back, but one day apart, and so it's fresh in my mind. I remember words, and they literally, even when he says, "I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool," it's just like words like that. Like that's like they literally repeat the same lines. There's moments that they try to do something unique, like they added the element of him sleepwalking which didn't go anywhere. Like I don't know
Like, why?
why if you're not gonna do something. It's like they brought her up for that one time, and then it gave them that artful moment where they could have her falling into like the vines or whatever, and then she wakes up and she's in her blanket, and then the blanket has vines on it. Like I saw that as them trying to do something artful, and then she has all the scratches, and when I saw the scratches, I literally, I just like with the first movie, I said, "Wait, is this movie going to have an actual ghost?" Because I'm like, were they trying to say that she scratched herself like that badly? Which I guess that's what they were saying. But but at that moment, I was thinking to myself, those scratches, are they trying to say that Rebecca scratched her? Like, what's happening here? What is the point of this? Um, so there's a lot of things like that, or not a lot of things, but there's moments like that where I feel like they were trying to do something more unique, but like we just said, they don't. It doesn't feel like it goes anywhere.
Yeah, it definitely fell flat for me there, especially with like the dreams, the nightmares, and her seeing a figure,
Rebecca,
right? Like we don't see like that. Like if we were talking in the other episode for the 1940 version, one of the coolest things about that movie is that we never see Rebecca. And here we have in this movie, it's kind of like, did they know the whole point of the movie? Did they know what Hitchcock was going for? Why do you have Rebecca in the movie? And
yeah,
that we don't really see her. We see like an image of her, and we don't have that at all in the original movie. And I think that it kind of makes it feel like she's having nightmares, like she's being haunted by Rebecca. But I think that idea makes Rebecca's character less powerful by giving her an actual
form.
presence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The fact that we see her makes, yeah, you're right, makes her weaker almost. Um, and I think that that's a. I don't know why they chose to do that. And even with the way this movie begins, so with the 1940 film, and unfortunately we do have to compare the 1940 film. It opens in a very kind of normal way, like as far as like normal movie. But this movie begins like a horror film. Actually, he starts with the water and the hair in the water, and then like it's kind of ominously moving, and then the title comes up, Rebecca, and you just kind of see it, and there's this really creepy music, and then we see the thing. And while I like the imagery, I found myself being a little disappointed in the fact that it creates an expectation of what the movie is. And with the first movie, the expectation that it created was one that it was one that it was planning to subvert. While this one, the way this begins, it begins with the expectation for what the movie actually is, to prepare you for what it actually is, And I think I prefer it when you don't see it coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes the surprise away. This movie just felt very flat because it basically took something that had twists and turns and put it in a context where they lead you to figure out everything on your own, almost, right? And you know, it's just it takes away so much surprise. So even if you if you watch the 2020 version first and you never watch the 1940 version, I think you're just gonna watch the movie and be like, this is not a good movie because it's so plain. There's nothing in it that makes you go, wow, that like took me off guard, or wow, that looked beautiful, because there's, like I said, it's really unremarkable.
Yeah, it's true. There's not anything really that makes it stand out. And I kept asking myself, if I didn't see the 1940s version and I watched this version first, how would I feel in these moments? Because a lot of the moments that fell flat for me, talking about it being just an overall flat movie, are, at least for me, related to how I know they were handled in the original. And, we keep talking about how if you're going to do this, find a way to make it your own. And at the same time, you have to try to make it your own in a way that also makes it stand out. And there were just elements, and I'm not sure how you felt about these, but like, for instance, the reveal at the when the near the end of the movie, where we find out what happened to Rebecca. In this case, Rebecca being like a terrible person and everything else like that. The story, first off, he starts it. You start to suspect that he might have killed her before we actually have the conversation that he didn't love her. And I didn't like that, because I like not knowing and then having everything recontextualized after hearing it from him. So that order bothered me. And then the inclusion of a gun, where it makes it almost kind of ambiguous whether or not he did or did not shoot her, also bothered me, because the 1940 version felt good from a standpoint of he actually didn't do anything wrong, but she made it look like he did, and that's why he had to act, versus he actually tried to kill her. So he actually is a murderer, and it just makes Rebecca, once again, just a little weaker than she was in that original movie.
Right, because she's no longer manipulating anyone. Technically, I mean, technically she wasn't in the first one either, but it was designed in a way to make you feel like she was manipulating everyone. And in this one, she had no power really. Like it was just a regular old mystery. Um,
Right.
yeah, and the reveal in that, it didn't make me feel like, even though I already knew, it didn't make me feel like, oh, he, like, he was kind of had his hand tied, um and like he was really having a conundrum here, and he really didn't know what to do to fix it. Instead I felt like, oh, he kind of got caught in a thing, and like, now he's just trying to deal with it, and like he's neither good nor bad. He's just kind of neutral because he just kind of had bad luck marrying someone that he didn't like, or I don't even think he said he hated her. He did, but it wasn't powerful enough, because in the original movie, when he said I hated her, it was very emphasized.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's when you really feel like, oh, actually Maxim is a really good guy, and the reason why he has all these angry outbursts is because it's reminding him of something that his wife Rebecca trapped him in. Like, he was done wrong, and that's why he's getting flustered. But in this one, it's just like, why is he getting angry? It's like, it just doesn't feel as strong, because there aren't any like triggers. Like, there are always things that trigger his anger in the first
Yeah.
movie. in this one, like it doesn't, the triggers don't really line up.
Right. Yeah, and the other something else that just brought to my mind while I was listening to you talk about the reveal and everything. I remembered that when we're seeing it in the original movie and how the camera work acts as Rebecca is there, while acts as if she's there while we're hearing the dialogue. He tries to do something similar, but he's kind of doing the action with Mrs. De Winter being Rebecca almost. So they have this weird thing where she's holding the gun to him as if she's going to shoot. But it's like she has no reason to shoot him at that point because he's yelled at her a few times, but he hasn't done anything that would be like a murderable offense. Like he never hit her or anything else like that. So that scene, and it's trying to build like that tension where she has the gun on him and then she doesn't pull the trigger, and then he kind of like breathes easy as if he was actually in danger. But there was never a point where I believed that Mrs. De Winter was going to shoot him.
Yeah, well, for that I think he was kind of dangling like a carrot in front of her, like you can kill me now and you can take everything that I own the way Rebecca wanted. Like Rebecca was trying to take everything from him, and now you have the same opportunity. Are you going to take it?
But then she would be
Yeah, I know. It did. Yeah, exactly. It didn't make any sense. Like I thought that was stupid. Like why would you? It didn't make any sense why he would dangle the carrot in front of her in the first place. Because, like, why would you assume that she's just like him, like Rebecca when
fell for her. You actually love
her. Yeah, you love her because she's nothing like Rebecca. So I really rolled my eyes there because I was like, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. Like, did you watch the first movie at all?
Well, I mean, and even then, like the other part that I was wondering if you rolled your eyes at was when he was talking about that story. He said that Rebecca kind of looked at him with like pleading eyes and said like please when she wanted him to kill her. And it's like that's not Rebecca.
It's not.
Rebecca doesn't act like this woman, but I guess they're trying to make a different version of her. But once again, it's a version that feels weaker than the original and doesn't stand out as much because the original is somebody who is manipulative until death, is proud until death, who actually does not fear anything. The way Frank said, she does not fear anything, including death, which is proven in the 1940 version by her using her death in order to try to ruin someone's life. But in this movie, it seems like that's not true. She does fear death, and she doesn't want to go through the pain of cancer, and so she's asking him to kill her because she doesn't want to have to go through that pain, and she's too afraid to do it herself. So now we have a different kind of Rebecca, but this Rebecca is not nearly as interesting as the one that came before.
And we even see her dead body.
Oh, wow, you're right. I forgot about that.
Like, how much weaker can you make her by showing her dead body?
Yeah, and you see, like, we talk about this. I know that Hitchcock is a master of suspense, not horror, but the same tenets kind of apply. In order to make a suspenseful moment or a scary horror movie scene, it's in what you don't see. It's in you hiding the image, you keeping it away from the audience and letting them fill in the blanks. And in many ways, you could call Rebecca almost a horror movie monster in that way because you don't actually ever see her, but her presence is felt and you fill in the blanks. When you see that scene describing how she died, you are filling in it in yourself. You're not actually seeing her body, and even when they find her body, you never see her body. So it's almost like she actually is a ghost. But by having these moments where she appears in a vision or a dream, nightmare, or we see her body, it diminishes her power and her overall impact for a movie that's named after her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really just takes so much. This movie takes so much away from her. I don't like it.
But on the flip side, though, Mrs. Danvers, again, I feel was an excellently casted person. I forget the actress's name, but I've seen her in a couple of other things, and she did a really great job as Mrs. Danvers in this movie. She had this presence, even when she was walking, she felt elegant, she felt powerful, and I appreciated that about her character. Um, I also think this movie kind of improves a little bit more on Mrs. De Winters. It gave her more to do, and it gave her more agency in this movie. Um, as far as like by the end of the film and like what she's actually like her actually having a hand in what's happening, because in the original they kind of leave her at home when they go to do that thing that we were talking about where they have the criminal, where they have the accused, the accuser, the cop, and the best friend. So they at least did away with that because they realized that that was going to be a little hard for people to buy. But they have her basically trying to be more active. And regardless of how it plays out, I can appreciate the idea that they're trying to give her more agency when she's making that change to being a new person.
That I can agree with. My only problem is that she starts to become a stronger person before the reveal, which I didn't like. Because
Yes.
she tries to fire Miss Danvers before the reveal, which I like. Like, I appreciate that they added the whole idea of trying to fire Miss Danvers in the first place, but I feel like they gave Mrs. De Winter too much power at the
Too early.
wrong time. Yeah, too early, because at that time she's still supposed to be like in the shadow Rebecca. She still believes that her husband loves her more than her. So there's no reason for her to be like, where is the strength coming from, right?
True. And she also still feels like an outsider. She doesn't feel like Mrs. De Winter yet. So like the new Mrs. De Winter. So it's kind of weird that there's not even a scene where she at least talks to Maxim and says, "I find Mrs. Danvers dreadful," and then he can just like pass it off and be like, "Well, she's been for the family for years. She's not going anywhere. Try to make up with her and try to be friendly." Like that feels like a conversation that should have been had more so than her almost kind of like going around him to fire her without consulting him in his in the house that she's like married into. It definitely doesn't feel like she would feel comfortable enough to have that power yet when this is all still new to her.
Yeah, and for a movie that emphasized classism so much at the beginning, it just felt really out of place for her to do that. The other thing I was really missing that was in the first film that they didn't really have in the 2020 version is that moment when she looks at Miss Danvers and she says, "I am Mrs. De Winter," because then that was like, oh, burn. And they took it away from her. Like that was such a like a hot moment. I'm like, oh dang, she just said that.
I mean, I think they tried to give it to her when she was firing her, because he's like, "Does Mr. DeWitt just know about it?" And he said, and she's like, "It's my call" or whatever. I think that that was like their version.
Yeah, but I guess like the difference is that like because everyone was still calling Rebecca Mrs. De Winter, and she didn't have a name, and in this movie she didn't have a name either. So that line of saying "I am Mrs. De Winter" is
Yeah.
her taking her identity and her stepping out of Rebecca's shadow. We never had that in this movie. But then again, they didn't really cast her in Rebecca's shadow in the first place, not properly at least. They didn't really focus on it a lot, so it didn't really feel like she was needing to overcome anything but her own self confidence, which
That's
is not very nice for a character arc, really.
it's a very good point. Like, it's very well said. All right, that's the show.
Drop the mic.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and I didn't really see it that I didn't see it that way or look at it that way. But I think that hearing you explain it, you're 100% right about that, and it kind of it is one element that does make the character feel a little bit weaker than her counterpart, um, which is unfortunate.
Yep. I think the only other thing that I had to say was I didn't really understand why there were two dogs, but they only ever talked to one dog,
One,
and
they only call one. They say Jasper,
Jasper
and then the other one is just kind of like,
in or out, like he's just there, but we don't know who it is. That was just weird. Like, why even have two dogs? I just didn't understand the choice. What I did like, there were actually a couple of things that I liked. It was interesting. I liked that they had the grandmother as a new character. And
yes,
having that whole scene with her being like, "You're not Mrs. De Winter. Where's Rebecca?" Blah blah blah. Because I thought that was cool. Like that would have been cool to have in the first movie, but it didn't fit in with this movie because they were not consistent with that theme. Um,
no, they
yeah.
weren't. And another thing I actually missed in this movie was the relationship with the sister. We didn't talk about it this much in that much in our first conversation, but in the 1940 movie, they really build an ally out of the sister after posing her as a threat. They basically say this sister is like she's direct and she's if she doesn't like you, she'll tell you and everything else like that, and she ends up being like her biggest supporter. And in this movie they kind of brush over that. Like there's a moment with them after the whole dress fiasco, but you lose that whole connection between those two and giving her this kind of friend. And maybe they did that to try to make her feel more isolated and alone, but it's one element that it's not a big deal, but it is an element that I missed.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. Because they didn't build up that relationship. I did like the scene after the whole dress fiasco. Because I felt that was missing actually from the first movie. So I did
Mhm.
feel like in some ways there were some corrections or some things that would have been nice to have in the original movie, but it was like lacking so much from the other movie that it was kind of like you filled in these other holes, but now you have all these other gaping holes that make these filling of these little holes not make any sense at all. But I did appreciate the effort in trying to improve on the original story. I just think that there was too much lost from the original movie, and I kind of wish that instead of trying to um, like remaster an old movie, that they should have tried to take the story and then make it their own. Because again, like I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but this story is actually from a book.
Right.
So that story is out there, and you can interpret that story any way you want to, and you can make a movie about a story and have many different versions and takes on the same story. Um, but what they did was they took Hitchcock's old film and tried to remake it, and I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, and because then they didn't. If you remake something, if you can't remake something and then just change little bits of it, and then expect it to still work, because the original works because it's building blocks on top of each other, right? And if you're trying to do those same building blocks, but you want to leave certain blocks out, like you said, you're going to be left with gaping holes. So either you do it to make it your own, or you just make it like you just remake it verbatim. And
Or
if
you
that's the
have
point, then
to,
why remake it?
yeah, or at least really understand all the motives and all the reasons and decisions that Hitchcock made to make the movie what it is. Because if you don't understand the essence of it and the themes of it, then you're not going to come out with something anywhere remotely as good as it, even though it was made 80 years ago.
No, it's true. And that leads me to like the last 2 points that I want to bring up, which one being the fact that I am a little bit let down in this movie because of the fact that by the end, and it's not a big deal, it's just a different interpretation, but by the end of the movie, um the cousin and Mrs. Danvers know, not even quote unquote know, they do absolutely know that Rebecca was murdered. And I don't like that in this movie. I liked them not. actually knowing and thinking that it was a suicide. So um, it's almost kind of like Maxim got away with it. I don't like this idea that Maxim gets proven innocent, but the cousin and Mrs. Danvers still know, and it's kind of like a lingering thing of the cousin might do something one day. I I don't personally like that, but it's a choice, so fine, it's different. My final question, though, for you is, what do you think about the ending? Because while overall it's the same, Mrs. Danvers' demise is handled differently. So how do you feel about that?
I again feel like it's more stuff taken away from Rebecca. She was the one that drowned. She should be the only one to have drowned. The fact that, I mean, I guess it kind of shows that like she wanted to be in the same place as Rebecca, and so therefore she was going to drown herself. But I thought that it took away from Rebecca. It makes you think, oh, so the first body that we saw at the beginning of the movie is actually Mrs. Danvers and not Rebecca. So then we're taking away from Rebecca again. And I also just, I thought it was weird that Mrs. De Winter was like, "Where's Miss Danvers? I'm gonna go look for her," and then like try to stop her, but then like, I mean, what is she gonna do? What, like, if you think about it, like, what is she going to do when she finds Mrs. Danvers? So I was like, the
By
fact
herself.
right, exactly. I'm like, what are you even doing? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. And the other
Right.
thing that I didn't like was the blackmail thing. That they made it like a pretty big thing. They made Maxim and Mrs. De Winters guilty of blackmail instead of the cousin, so he gets no punishment in this movie, which he should. And in the original movie, he does get arrested for blackmail, or he gets threatened for it. So it's just, why?
No, it's you're right. It's so much weaker because what it also does is make their characters weaker, or the character of Maxim. Because in that, I remember in the 1940 movie when he gets, it gets brought up for blackmail. Rather than Maxim even entertaining it, he immediately he makes it look like he's entertaining it, and then he calls the cop in, and then tells the cop exactly what's happening.
Obstruction
So
of justice.
yeah, and it's great because it's like not only does it make Maxim look more innocent, but it also shows that Maxim's just like it makes him a stronger character. No, you will not blackmail me. I don't care who you are. Look, this is how confident I am. I'll bring the cop in and I'll tell him exactly what's happening. And so there's just the end of this movie just does it makes them look guilty, and it implies that they're guilty, which is why the cousin and Mrs. Danvers know that they're guilty. Like Mrs. Danvers even says he killed her. And to me that's not as strong.
And it makes them bad people, right? Because they did entertain the idea of blackmail. They did write the check.
Right.
She did suggest it was her idea. And then she even goes as far as to go to the, and I know that you liked it because it was giving her an active part, and making her a stronger character. But it makes her a bad person,
That's
a
true.
guilty person, because she's going around the law. She's going above the law by like stealing the evidence for herself because she's trying to hide
That's
whatever's in there. So in the original movie, the couple, they are good people, but in this movie they are not. In many ways, they have done wrong. So it's hard to root for them. And then when you level down the character of Rebecca, they're kind of all almost on the same playing field. And so you don't really root for anyone, and you don't really root against anyone, except for maybe Mrs. Danvers. But
Yeah. No, that's 100%. Cheryl's killing it. Don't mess with Cheryl on Hitchcock related films. You're 100% right. And if they're good put into a bad situation, you want them to succeed. If they're bad put into a bad situation, you don't care as much.
yep.
So, but yeah, that's it. Like that's what we thought about the remake of Rebecca 2020, based on the 1940 film of the same name. What did you guys think about it? Have you guys seen the film? Did you like it? Did you think that it was a superior version to the last movie, or do you think that it's on par, or do you agree like with us where you just didn't enjoy it that much, even taking it as its own movie? Whatever you thought about it, comment below. Let us know. And while you're down there, if you give us a like, share, and subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we'll see you all next time.